to talk about presence today. And by the end of this talk, you will be able to walk away with 3 concrete things you can do to increase your presence with anyone, anytime, anywhere. But before we go forward, I have this question. When we say presence, what do you mean by that? I mean, what does it mean if you say somebody has presence? Memorable. Memorable, it's good. What else? Memorable, confident. Engaged. Anything else? Memorable, confident, engaged. Yes, ma'am. A good listener. And you had one. Influential. Okay, so these are all the things. When we teach actors to be present, there's really sort of 3 different words that we use. And one of them is presence, that sort of glowing through the skin. Somebody walks in the room and all eyes turn. The problem is, if you try and teach an actor how to do that, they look kind of stupid. Because they get up and they go, and you go, what are you doing, man? Don't do that. The other, it turns out, to teach someone to have presence, that glowing thing, you have to do the other 2 homonyms for it. And one is present, as if a gift you give to someone. And it is the gift of attention. And the other one, the most important one, is present as in this moment. Not in the future or not in the past, but in this particular moment. Many times you've been talking with somebody and you can tell that they're not really there. Have you ever been, raise your hand if you've ever been on the phone and you could tell that the person was doing something else? Well, okay, so it's not just me. I thought it was just me. So let me tell you sort of how I know this. I am, by profession, what's called a professional fight director. So if you've ever seen a sword fight or a gunfight in film or television, I do that. So my job is to teach people how to sword fight, gunfight, fall downstairs, and catch on fire. So one, yeah, that's a real job. It's an actual job they pay you for. And 2, it totally is as much fun as it sounds. Now, when people hear what I do for a living, they always ask me a couple questions. The first question I get asked is, have you worked with any famous people? Yes, I've worked with lots and lots of famous people. And I've also worked with a lot of people that you haven't heard of. But if it seems too fancy, let me bring it back down to earth. This film over here, Iborgs, that was the last film I did about 1.5 years ago. Iborgs. Just think about the word for a second. And it was huge on the Sci-Fi Channel in Germany. And it's out on Netflix right now. It came out a few months ago, and here's my promise to you. If you're drunk at night and you're flipping through the channels and you got nothing else to watch, totally turn on Iborgs. I promise you. But I warn you, there's little robots that have taken over the government, and only one man can save us. I don't want to give anything else away. Now, the other question I get asked is, what's the weirdest part about your job? And I had to think about this, because the truth is, the weirdest part about my job isn't me, it's that my children have no sense of what normal is anymore. For example, this last weekend, this guy, his name is Frank Alfano. Frank Alfano is a professional stuntman out of New York, and he specializes in burns. This is Frank at work. And so Frank's at my house, and we're hanging out. And he said, I said, I have to leave this tomorrow to go somewhere. And he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to give a talk to some firemen and police pension people. And he said, we have to catch you on fire. And I was like, no, Frank, you're not going to catch me on fire in my backyard. And my son, my oldest son, who's 15, said, well, Daddy, why don't you use your fire whip? And Frank said, what's a fire whip? And I said, all right, I'll show you. So this is a fire whip. It is, as you would imagine, it's a whip you catch on fire. Now, I have to tell you some quick things about this. The first thing you need to know is this is my backyard. The second thing you need to know is we have soaked my backyard in water, and I am wearing a gel, a flame retardant gel on my clothing. I didn't tell this to my wife. She didn't know about the gel part. When I crack the whip, there is a fluid on it, and it's a special fluid that burns at a high light rate, but not a lot of heat. And when I crack it, a lot of the fluid will come off, and you'll see it'll spread around in the yard. I promise you I'm not lighting my yard on fire. It's all the fluid. Just off camera is a professional stuntman with a blanket in case something catches on fire. There's water there, and I gave my son a fire extinguisher. And he said, what do I do with this? I said, in case the daddy catches on fire. He was like, ha ha ha. Okay, so so then this is an average Saturday night at my house. Okay, so is this just me? Everybody else did this, right? This is how it all is. Now, the eagle-eyed among you may notice that there's some flame on my shirt. Yeah, so now, again, I had a flame retardant gel on. This is the fluid from the whip that's just gotten on the shirt, and I'm not in any trouble. But my son said, Daddy, you're on fire. Like you would say, there's someone at the mailbox. And my wife dropped the camera immediately after this, so I don't have any. So I just, really quick word about presents. If you're going to catch your shirt on fire, tell your wife in advance that you've planned for that. This is just a little word of advice. Now, the reason I thought this might be fun to start with is because when we talk about presence, a lot of times we get this kind of stuff confused with what presence is. And there's a cultural reference to this. You know this guy? The Dos Equis guy, right? The world's most interesting man. It was a whole series of commercials. Now, the problem is that people think that that's what presence is, to be interesting. And it turns out that that is absolutely not what presence is about. Presence is not about yourself. It's about your connection with someone else. And this is the first rule. Don't be interesting, be interested. If you ever hear somebody who talks about someone who has presence, they always say the same thing. They always say, when they were talking to me, it was like there was nobody else in the room, right? It's that ability to come into that moment. And let me explain even more why this matters. In addition to being a fight director, I also work in healthcare. I run, the easiest way to explain it is I run what's called a standardized patient program, where you train actors to be patients, to pretend to be patients, so that doctors can practice on them rather than practice on you. And the other thing I do is I teach bedside manner, I teach communication, and especially breaking bad news, how to tell patients and their families terrible things that are happening. And when that happens, you don't want your doctor to be interesting, and you don't want your doctor to be focused on them. You want your doctor to be focused on you. You want them to be interested in you. Now, in order to understand how a fight director works in healthcare, I have to take you back in time a little bit. The end of my military career was when I fell 5 stories off a wall while rock climbing on active duty. This was a risk we were taking, but it was supposed to be under control. Turns out I wasn't tied in right. And I had a hand hold. You sort of stick your hand in the rocks and you turn like this. I used to be thinner. This used to be easier. You had your hand like that. And then I was reaching for another grip, and the rock came out of the wall. And I threw my balance off, and I started to fall. And I turned to try and catch my balance. And I'm trying to see how to explain this. Have you ever stepped off a curb and you didn't know the curb was there and you sort of do that? Well, I just want you to imagine that feeling just keeps going. Or you wake up in bed, you sort of feel like you're falling, and it just keeps going. So there's that aspect to it. But the really, truly terrifying aspect is that as you're falling, especially at that height, every foot you fall, you gain 33 feet per second in terms of speed. You gain speed. And so you can hear, I heard the wind whistling in my ears faster and faster. Shh. And you think, oh my God, I'm traveling so fast. And if you're like me, you always sort of wondered, well, how will I die? And at that moment I thought, oh, all right, mystery solved. This is clearly it. Okay, this is the end. And then there was, who here's ever been in a car accident? Okay, so you know that you're just driving and then there's some sort of jolt right? You don't experience it in real time. The world just is jumbled. It was like that. The impact was just this tremendous thing. And then I thought, I'm alive, and I'm in a lot of pain. What had happened is I had shattered both of my legs, my left arm, and a bunch of internal organs. My wounds were what was called open and comminuted. For those who knows, that means the bones exploded and burst out of the skin, which is actually worse than it sounds. Because as the bones come out, some of you may know, they take arteries with them, which is what happened to me. So even though I had lived through the initial fall, I was bleeding to death on the stones. So they got me, and we went to the hospital, and they said, we will probably have to cut off both your legs. And I thought, I'm not sure you're supposed to tell me that. Are you supposed to tell me that? And they said, well, I'll try not to. And then they woke me up later, and they said, we've saved your legs, but you'll never walk again. And I said, yes, I will. I will. And I did. It took a year at Fort Bragg, slowly learning how to do it. And a bunch of special forces guys talked me and walked me and helped me through it. Said, you'll never walk again. I said, yes, and I did. And then after that, after a year, they said, that's pretty impressive, but you'll never run again. And I said, thank you very much. I hate running. That's the worst, right? I mean, can I get like that in writing, right? May not run. You gotta say, Aaron, you want to go jogging? Love to. I got a note, got a doctor's note. I can't. And true, I have not been jogging since 1989. I don't know if it shows. But I tell you that story to tell you this story. When they came to get me, they said, we've called a helicopter because if we don't get you down soon, you'll die. And I thought, you people need to take some classes in how to talk to people. You're not supposed to say this. So I was losing a lot of blood at this point. And if you've ever passed out, you know that the world sort of just closes in like this. You sort of this tunnel vision. And it's like that, except I couldn't move, so I was lying in this patch of ground. And the world is closing in, and I realized that that patch of ground was going to be the last thing I ever saw. So that patch of ground became the most important thing to me in the entire world because it was the end of it. And as I tried to hold on because I just wanted this moment not to end. Because once that moment ended, that moment was going to end. And the next thing I know, there's a woman right here, right in my face, and she was shaking me. She said, stay with me, stay with me. I thought, okay, I'm here, I'm good, I'm fine. Stop shaking, that hurts. And then they started to carry me off the mountain. And as we're walking down the mountain, I'm fading out again. And then the next thing I know, I feel this squeeze in my hand. And I'm in a stretcher on my side, and the lady is holding my hand. She was squeezing my hand tightly to bring me back. If you've ever had a workshop in leadership, I need to tell you something. That is leadership. That woman led me back to life through nothing else but holding my hand. She was right here at my side walking down. And that remains, to this day, birth of my children, all the things, the most powerful communicative event of my life. And she didn't say a thing. She just held my hand and squeezed it. And in that squeeze, she said, I understand you're scared. I understand you're in pain. I'm here. I'm right here with you. And then I was fading a little bit more, and then they got me in the helicopter. And now I'm lying this way. And the next thing I know, she's like kneeling down at my side, saying, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And now, in my experience, right, I'm fading in and out, and then there's this woman's face here, and then there's this woman's face here, and then there's a woman's face here. And I was like, you're just everywhere. What's going on? And then she said, and here's the message that I've come to deliver. She said, I'm right where I need to be. And it turns out that presence is exactly that. It is not about what you say, but it often has to do with your body language, your tone of voice, and where you are physically in relationship to that other person. To explain a little bit more about what I mean by this, I would like, I could use a volunteer. I promise you I won't ask you to do anything strange, but sit. Just a volunteer, any volunteer. Come on up here. Round of applause. And you are?
Patty.
Patty, Aaron, very nice to meet you. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a series of skits. And the first skit, if you can just have a seat here. And all I want you to do is I want you to imagine that you're my boss, and that we're going to have a talk about my performance. And you're going to say, we need to have a talk about your performance. That's your line.
We need to have a talk about your performance.
And scene. Okay, thank you very much. How's this going for me? It's not going so great for me. Why is this not going so great for me? Yeah, she's so far away. This is, now, what we're doing right now is a thing called proxemics. Proxemics has to do with the science of how you interact with the other person in space. So when that woman was right in my face, she was proximally in here, or she was proximally at my side, or she was proximally kneeling down. In this instance, we're in what's called the competitive relationship. The keys to this are our shoulders, hips, and feet are pointed opposite to each other. Now, there's also a lot of stuff between us, so distance has something to do with it. But the amount of stuff here merely adds formality. This is where you might sit two rival warlords negotiating a peace treaty, right? So that I can see you, but I can't get to you, and I'm safer. We're protected by this. This actually separates us. You may have heard you're not supposed to cross your arms in a conversation. That's a lie. It's an absolute lie. You can absolutely cross your arms. But what this is it's stuff between you and the other person. And depending on how you're situated, it can become a barrier. Now, just stay where you are. And if I remove, if I make this table a little less egregiously formal, we do it this way. Same thing. We need to talk about your performance.
Aaron, we need to talk about your performance.
And scene. Is this really any better for me? I got to tell you, it doesn't feel that much better. Now, the key is we have less stuff, less formal stuff, but there is still a barrier between us, but it's not the barrier that's the most important thing. It's that we're here in this relationship. Shoulders, hips, feet, opposite each other, competing with each other. This is where you sit to play chess. This is where you can watch somebody. Now, there are pluses and minuses to this, because the advantage of this is we can also gaze longingly into each other's eyes, should we want. I could reach across, we could touch. I've always loved you. Now, I don't know if this is an HR convention. Don't do that. Just so we're clear, that's probably not a conversation you should have at work anyway. But if you've ever gone to a restaurant, and you sit at a booth across from your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or girlfriend, you're in a competitive relationship, and yet it doesn't feel competitive because it can also be intimate if you're close enough. Now, the problem at work is there's been some studies about managers who had a desk in their office and routinely sat behind their desk when interacting with their reports. And those managers were almost universally rated less open, less fair, and less willing to listen, just based on where they sit. Now, whether that's a correlation or causation, we have no idea, but the data is very, very robust. This is not a bad place to sit if you need to impose the status of your relationship. If you need to reinforce that I'm in charge, this is a great place to sit. In my office, when students come, when they're in trouble, I have a really long desk and a couch at one end. I make them sit down so they're a little lower, and I sit all the way back, and there's a big placard that says Dr. Anderson right in front of me, and I sit and I say, what did you do? And it's actually quite helpful, but you need to know what this relationship is. Let's change a little bit. Could you scoot back just a touch? So I'm going to... Would you sit right here? We'll just face this way. And let's say that I actually have a report. You need to point out something about my report. Your line, you know the line, right?
Oh, Aaron, we need to talk about your performance.
And scene. Okay, is this any better? It's a little better. It's a little better. It's interesting. This is what's called the cooperative relationship. The key here is that our shoulders, hips, and feet are in parallel with each other. We don't have a relationship with each other so much as we're sharing a common task. This is where car salesmen are taught to get you to buy a car. Can I sell you a car? No. You just stand up for a second? I'm going to sell you a car. So we'll do this. How are you doing? I'll come in.
Well.
It's
Thank
good.
you very
Take a
much.
look at that car. Can you see yourself in that car?
Ooh, the
yeah.
silver one?
Ooh,
over
the
there?
silver one, yes. So you've seen this, right? Anyone raise your hand if you've ever had somebody do this to you. Okay. Why do you think they do that? Because it works. It absolutely works. There's good research that suggests this is where you will have a lawyer sit on the same side of the table to get the deal signed. There's also some interesting research out of hospitals that if you were a nurse and you needed to get your patient to go someplace, so if you were to stand, let's say that I have a walker, and you stand right in front of me and you say, Dr. Anderson, we need to take you to physical therapy.
Dr. Anderson, we need to take you to physical.
Go away, I'm never going. Okay, so rarely in this proximal relationship, in a competitive relationship, it tends to bring out antagonistic feelings. And yet, if we did the same thing, and I were here, and you just stood by my side, took my arm, and same line.
We need to take you to physical therapy.
I'm oddly compelled to go in the direction you would like me to go. There's actually good data that suggests that standing on the same side of someone and walking with them gets them where you need to go. Now, in this instance, this cooperative, if you have a seat one more time, I'm sorry to make you stand up and sit down so many times. This is an interesting one because what it can do is it can take your relationship out of it. So let's say that we were close friends and she needed to talk about my performance. Note what this does. It puts us on the same side of the table, but it's about the task. It's not about our relationship. This is actually a fantastic place to sit if you need to take your relationship out of an issue. The cooperative. If you need to get the deal signed, the cooperative position. There's another position. If you would move your chair to about where that is. Same line.
Aaron, we need to talk about your performance.
Okay, I'm getting tired of this, but okay, yeah. How's this one? Better, right? This is actually called the rapport building position. Its technical term is the corner position. But the main thing to recognize is that it's not about having a corner. It's about, note where our feet and hips are. Our feet and hips are intersected. We're not against each other, and we're not parallel. We're kind of a combination of those two things. We're in parallel, and where we overlap, we have a shared goal. Now, the interesting thing is, this is where you and your friends sit. If this building were a little higher and there were a bus stop down below us, you'd be able to tell who the friends were based on how they were standing. So, for instance, I'll ask you to stand up one more time. People at a bus stop don't stand and talk to each other like this. If they don't know each other, they stand like this and wait for the bus. Most friends stand roughly in this position. If you've ever been, this is the corner position. This is intense. This is where basketball players tell, you gotta make the shot. You gotta make the shot. And this is, how you doing? How was your night?
As well. How was yours?
It was great, actually. It was quite nice. This is, have you ever walked up to a group of people and they're standing in a circle? And unless somebody turns and lets you into the circle, you're excluded. That proximal relationship is a good way of doing things. I promise you, if you go to Starbucks, you can watch, just by seeing how people stand in relationship to you, what their relationship is. So now we have the competitive, cooperative, corner. There's one last one that I want you to know. So let's imagine that you are right here. Let's say that this is a cafeteria, and you're eating, and you don't know me, and this is the only table there, so I'm going to sit at the table. Where do I sit? Do I sit here? Probably not. Do I sit here? Probably not. Do I sit here? Absolutely not. So, where else could I sit? Well, so let's try the far edge. It's an interesting thing. So by sitting far away, but watch what happens.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm the creepy guy. Why? It's because these relationships have to do with where our focus is. My eye line is intersecting her space. I'm watching this. Have you ever been at a coffee shop or something? You know, you're sort of just zoned out, you're sitting there, and then you realize you've been staring at someone, and they go, and you go. That's what that is. That's your eye line intruding on someone's space. In truth, there's really only one place that I can sit and make her feel safe. Where is that? That's right here. And sort of turned away. What I'm doing is I'm pretending that there's a little wall up and that that's her space and this is my space, and I'm subdividing the space around us. This is called the independent relationship, the independent position. The problem is in healthcare, a lot of doctors' offices are set up so that they're set up to have an independent position. There's a table, a chair that the patient sits on, and then there's a computer where the doctor sits at. And what that means is that the patient's world and the doctor's world have nothing to do with each other. One of the first studies that we did, we just asked doctors to simply turn and make eye contact, that idea of letting your gaze. And the patient satisfaction scores, whether or not the doctor were listening, were empathetic, cared, or were good doctors, increased dramatically just by turning around and looking at the person, which seems like a totally obvious thing. And I thought, who doesn't know this? But you have to understand our environment is set to impede a lot of these things. The hospitals are built badly. A lot of places are built wrong. Now, those relationships, I'm going to move this table out of the way. Those relationships are universal. There are some things that are different in terms of how close you can get to somebody and how far away. So for instance, in New York City, where a high urban density, you can get very close to somebody and you're not too worried. You don't think that they're invading your space just because of the density. But in Texas, if you're 100 yards, you're like, that's far enough. Far enough, don't come any closer. But in terms of these relationships, I promise you, anywhere in the world, if you get on an elevator and break the rules, they will notice. So would you stand in an elevator here and imagine that you're looking out that way, and then I get on the elevator and I stand like this. Or I stand like this. Can't do it. Anywhere in the world, they will look at you. There's only two places you can stand in an elevator with strangers. Cooperative, we are both waiting for the same light to change. We are on the same side of an issue. We have a task. We are sharing the task, waiting for the light to change. Or independent, where I sort of turn sideways and play on my phone and pretend she's not there. Those are the only two places, anywhere in the world. Now there's one other thing. In addition to this proximal relationship, there's also status in terms of height. So I'm gonna do what the textbooks say to build rapport with you, if I may. If you'll have a seat. Have a seat. So the medical textbooks say, in order to build rapport, you should keep an open body language, smile, lean in a little bit, and say hi. So I'm going to do all that. Hi. How are we doing? Feeling rapport? Feeling the love? A little weird.
Feeling something.
What's going on? There's a couple things going on. What's wrong with this? Yeah, so one, I'm too close, right? I'm in that personal space. But even if I'm this way, how you doing? Still a little weird. Now, one of the reasons is it's because my eye line is towering over her. And all mammals are wired this way. We're mammals. We are all wired to recognize that things that were bigger than us are potential threats or are imposing status in some way. Your ancestors all recognize this. Your ancestors that didn't recognize that were eaten and died. All our ancestors recognize this. What that means is on a very subliminal level, I can change the status of our relationship just by leveling my eye line. This is better, right?
Very much.
Already better. Now we're on the same level. There's another interesting thing. If I needed to give her status, I could simply lower my eye line in relationship to her. And doctors do this sometimes. If you need the patient to think it's their idea, I'll say, what do you think about taking your medication?
I don't like it.
Yeah, I think you should. By lowering my eye line below hers, I subconsciously give her status in that moment. I become less of a threat. Conversely, if we have nurses and there's a disruptive patient, by standing up, you impose status. So recognizing where you are proximally with somebody, what the room is like, what your physical relationship is with them in space, makes a lot of difference. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Feels great. You have a career in acting if you want it. Now, so these are two things that you can do. One, don't be interesting, be interested. Two, be where you need to be. And the third thing, in order to do this, I need to tell you another story. And this one does not reflect well on me, but that's okay. So 2 years ago, I forgot my wedding anniversary. Oh, I know. Wow, really? I'm not proud of it. I'm just telling you the facts. So I'm going to take you on a journey of my wife's happiness over the course of that date. So here is where we'll rate how well she's thinking it's going. Awesome, okay, terrible. And this is time. So I couldn't get a reservation at a place to eat. So I had to go to Outback Steakhouse. So we started at Outback Steakhouse, which is fine. Please, it's fine. But we started there, and I thought, okay, it's okay. And then, as the evening went on, my wife realized, you totally forgot our anniversary, didn't you? And her happiness starts to go down. And now I'm thinking, okay, you got to turn this around. So I said, well, no, actually, I was thinking about our second date. Do you remember our second date when we went out and got steak? The truth is, she does not remember our second date, and neither do I, but she believed me. No one remembers her second date. I'm just assuming it was steak, and I said it with enough conviction that she believed me. Happiness started to go up, and I'm thinking, I got this, man. I totally got this. But then I heard this voice behind me. It was a little kid's voice. He said, Mommy, I don't feel so good. And the kid threw up. Yeah, I know. Happiness goes down. I'm like, oh, man, I got to turn this around. So I start talking about our kids, and do you remember this? And I start to get it to come up a little bit. And then I decide, okay, I'm going to turn on all the charm I got. I'm just going to take it to 11. I did everything I possibly could, and it made absolutely no difference. No one's coming back from that. So this is the graph of what that dinner was from her experience, from her perception. Now the next day, when her friend called and said, how was your date? What do you think she said? Did she go, it was awesome? Anybody? Wow. Okay. No, she did not. Did she say it was awful? No. She actually said, meh. She was like, yeah, it was we had dinner. He's an idiot, but I love him. I was like, okay. All right, lesson learned. So last year, I decide it's not happening to me again. So I got us reservations at a place in Richmond called the Boathouse. And it's a nice place, but it also has some special meaning for us. So I think, okay, I'm doing pretty well. And I had practiced dancing. So when a song came on, I got up and I said, would you like to dance? And her happiness went down. And she was like, what's going on? Who are you? Are you having an affair? I was like, no, I'm not having an affair. I'm trying to make it up for you from last time because I love you so much. And it goes up a little bit. I'm like, okay. So now I'm doing everything I can to make sure I'm focused on her over the course of the dinner, just talking about her, talking about our life. It's great, it's still going good. I'm looking around. There's no kids here, are there? Am I going to be okay? And then I make it to the end of the evening, very end of the evening. I think, I got this. And then the check came. And events differ as to what happened next. So if you were in my head, what you would have heard was, I have an itch on the side of my head, and I think I will scratch it. That was it. That was all that you would have heard. If you had been in my wife's head, you would have seen a very attractive waitress come up with a check and walk away, and your husband go. So she said, were you looking at her butt? And I was like, no, I was not looking at her butt. I honestly have no idea how attractive she was. She was very attractive. So I'm thinking, okay, all right, I can see this slipping away again. I'm like, oh, I got to turn this around. And so if you'd been inside my head, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud. So if you'd been inside my head, you would have heard, say something clever, right? Say something sarcastic to change the mood. By the way, gentlemen, don't ever do that. So if you'd been inside my head, you would have had positive intention trying to change the mood. If you'd been inside my wife's head, you would have heard your husband say, you sound like your mother. Oh, all right, I feel your disdain. I'm not saying I'm proud of it. I'm saying that it was funny inside my head. When it came out of my, like as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, oh no, you know, you're trying to get those words back. Just like, oh, please. Well, okay, so there's no coming back from this. I may have been a little bit more defensive. I was not, and we may have fought. Anyway, this was the second evening. Now, the next day, when her friend said, so how was this year? Did she say it was awesome? No. She most certainly did not. Did she say it was okay? No. She didn't even say it was awful. She said it was the worst. Worst anniversary ever. Now, you think I made these slides for you. I did not. I made these slides for my wife to point out that she was wrong in the way that she rated our evening. Gentlemen, come with me for a second. Don't ever make slides to explain to your wife while she's wrong. You have to trust me on this. Absolutely have to trust me. Now, I think that they're good slides. They're good, they're clear, my message is clear in terms of presentation is mwah, just trust me on this. Okay, so if we go back, that's free advice, just promise me. On this now, if we go back and we look at it from an economist's point of view, my wife's happiness the second year was actually twice as good as it was the year before. And yet, she rated them significantly different. Why is that? How it ended is absolutely part of it, and other little moments. They're called anchor points, what a social economist will call anchor points. It turns out that happiness rarely takes place in the moment. It usually takes place after the fact. When you look back on something and you say, oh, that was great, or that was this, or that was that. Happiness and satisfaction are a remembered event. How your interaction was with somebody, rarely do you conceive of it in the moment, it's after the fact. In healthcare, we call them empathy moments. And an empathy moment is when the patient gives something that has an emotional component. So for instance, if a doctor is talking to a patient and they say, so does anything make it better or worse? And the person says, well, I've had this pain in my stomach since my wife died. That's an emotional, they've just given you a part of themselves. They've given you something vulnerable at that moment. And if the doctor goes, okay, so eating doesn't make it worse? That's an empathy moment that they've skipped over. They didn't engage with that moment. And this turns out to be hugely important because if you engage with an empathy moment, you have instant rapport. When someone is happy or sad or particularly vulnerable, those are the moments that you can engage with and have a real impact. And if you don't engage with them, you have an instant non-impact, an anti-impact. In short, what this means is small moments matter. Some moments are more important than other moments. You don't have to be present all the time, but you do need to be present when it matters. You need to be able to turn on your presence in those moments. And there's a lot of ways of doing this. One of the simplest ways is to take any moment that's happening and make it special for that person. Let me give you an example. Does anyone in here have a business card? Anyone in here have business cards? Okay. Do you have your cell number on those business cards? Somebody does? Okay, here's what I'm going to recommend. Take your cell phone number off. Let me explain what I mean. If your cell number is on the card, everybody gets that information. That's the baseline. It's not any different from anybody else. But if you took your card and you handed it to somebody and said, hang on, let me give you my cell phone number. You write your cell phone number on it, and you hand that card to them. What have you done? You've made them special. you've made that information something that not everyone gets. Now, you could give it to everybody, but in that particular moment, you're making a connection with that other person. We've had patient satisfaction scores at hospitals go through the roof from doctors simply making little touches like this that connected with the patient in some way. I had one doctor that he gave his personal cell phone number out to all his patients, and I thought, I don't think that's a good idea. And he said, no one ever calls because they know I'm busy, but they know that they could if they had to. And he knew that he would answer the phone. It's an important thing. Now, there's another thing about this is making a moment special doesn't always just have to do with a prop, or it's not a gimmick. It doesn't have to be a gimmick. Has anyone in here, by show of hands, ever had this moment when you're out with your family or your child or your dog, or you're in the woods or something, and you think, this is wonderful. I don't want this moment to end. Raise your hand if you felt that. Okay, I don't want this moment to end. When you bring yourself into that moment, do you know what that feels like? Think about it. You know what that feels like? To bring your focus into this moment. That's what I did when I was lying on the stones, when that was the last thing I was going to have. Bring your focus to what you have. You can make any moment you want. You can turn it on. You can bring your focus. Presence is not the future or the past, it's now. You can, like this, bring your focus into everything about this moment. It's just a matter of turning on and being there. Now, there's a flip side to empathy moments, which is because some moments are more important than others, some moments are also more dangerous than others. When I first started working in healthcare, I was trying to understand the health system. So I would travel around the hospital, and they let me observe and shadow. So I was in surgeries. I didn't do any surgeries, but I would go and I would observe surgeries to watch how people interacted, to see what the problems were. And then I'd walk out, I was in scrubs, and you walk out of the doors into the waiting area. Show of hands, who's ever been in a waiting area while somebody else was having surgery? Okay, you know the fear you feel. I want you to imagine that from the doctor walks out of the doors, what are you thinking when that doctor comes out? Right? Are they coming for me? Do they have information for me? Now, I have one of my surgical friends says, you know what the worst, meanest practical joke you could ever do is? And this guy has a terrible sense of humor. He said, what you could do when you came out of those doors and everybody looked at you, you could look at somebody and go, oh, sorry, wrong person, and then walk away. Right? What a terrible thing to do. Now, what his point was, you could crush, and think about this, you could crush somebody's whole world with a breath. A breath could take them and crush them for a second. And even though you said, sorry, wrong person, it would shatter you. You would just be raw. Some moments are more important than others, and some of them are so raw with potential fear that even the slightest miscue will be misinterpreted. What we know from science is that in the absence of good information, when people are afraid, they will read in with their darkest fears. This is why we had to come up with those stupid little emoticons. You're fired. Oh, just kidding. Because in the absence of a lot of information that is conveyed through body language and tone of voice, in the absence of that, people will read in their fears. Now, when I teach in healthcare, the main thing that I teach is breaking bad news. And I work with palliative care and geriatrics and oncology fellows. These are doctors who are working with cancer patients and older patients. And palliative care, this is a man and wife in palliative care. For those who don't know, palliative care is when you're in healthcare, but medicine can't help you anymore. You're never going to get better. You're just going to be cared for. I was working with a doctor named Dr. Lori Lickham, who's one of the greatest palliative care professionals in the world. And when she went to see a patient for transitions of palliative care, she would always bring a glass of water with her because she knew that that moment was going to be so ripe with things that there's nothing she could say. But handing a glass of water would do what that woman, when she held my hand, was. It said, I know you're afraid. I know you're thirsty. I know you're worried. I will soothe you. I will give you what I can. And just that Small gift, gift of a glass of water. So I was teaching Breaking Bad News with her for a number of years, and in a room full of doctors. And then one day, Dr. Lickham said, I can't be there, would you please teach this class? Without me. And now, so I walk in a room, and it's about half this size, and there's about 50 doctors in there, and I'm going to talk to them about breaking bad news. Now, these are palliative care people who are working with people all the time. And I just, out of curiosity, I said, I know that we're going to talk about how to break bad news, but just out of curiosity, how often do you have to do this? And one doctor, she's sitting about where you are, raised her hand and said she'd had to do it 5 times just that morning. This was 9:30 a.m. By 9:30 a.m., she had told 5 different families, one that their mother was never getting better, one that their child was never getting better, and a couple others. 9:30 in the morning. Now, I don't know if you've ever had that experience of feeling like a fraud. I want you to imagine that I've never told anyone they're going to die, and if I tell you, totally get a second opinion, because I don't know what I'm talking about. I teach in healthcare, but I don't have an MD. I just know how to communicate. But these doctors weren't asking me about the medicine. They were asking about the human interaction. So I told them something I'm going to share with you in a second, a way of thinking about these conversations. And everything that I know, a lot of the things that we just talked about being present in the moment and focusing on the other person. Later that day, I'm in the hospital, and that same doctor came running down the hallway. It was like a scene out of a, Oprah movie. And it was like, she said, Dr. Anderson, I want you to know. After we talked, I had to talk to 5 more families. And those conversations were fundamentally better. Now, I'm in the arts. Nobody gets in the arts to make money. We get in the arts because we think if we do something right, it'll touch somebody in their life and they'll walk away and their life will be better. And I'm a fine actor and I'm good with a fire whip. But I've never had that much impact in that short a time. In an hour working with these doctors, I was able to change conversations that they would have with patients on the worst day of their lives and make it better. So the task that I want to give you, or not the task, the skill, this is what we teach doctors for breaking bad news. It's a whole acronym, but I won't go through the whole acronym. But there's a whole workshop, and if you'd like, I'm happy to come back and give you an entire workshop on how to break bad news. But the main point, and this I absolutely think everyone can learn from, this one point here, perception, is ask before you tell. Find out where your patient is emotionally and physically around this issue before moving on. And let me explain. I watched Dr. Lickham give this same diagnosis to 2 different people. It was a positive HIV test. Somebody had gone in, had blood work, and came back and had to hear the news that they were positive for the HIV virus. The first person, she said, what's your understanding of the HIV virus? That's the question. Ask before she tells. And the guy said, well, that's that AIDS thing. Only homosexuals get that. And I'm not a homosexual. She said, okay. And she took the conversation from there into education, and it was a long conversation. It included a lot of educational parts. About a week and a half later, she was talking to another patient. Same diagnosis, exact same diagnosis. And she said, what's your understanding of the HIV virus? And the man said, my partner has been HIV positive for 10 years, and I'm afraid that I am as well. These are 2 totally different conversations, fundamentally different conversations. And you would never have known if she'd have told the facts first. You don't know what conversation you're in until you know where the other person is. Presence is not about you, it's about them. The only way to know what's happening is to ask them, how are you doing? What are you thinking about this? Now, I want to end with this last story, because it's important, I think, if I have one message for you, it's this. Being present can change someone's life. And it has nothing to do with big things, it has everything to do with small things. Several months ago, I don't know how long ago, several months ago, a friend of mine, he has twins, and they were 8 months old at the time. And his wife was carrying one of them down the stairs. His name was Grant. And she slipped. And she fell backwards, and Grant hit his head on the stair and began to throw up. 7-month-old baby. She took him to the hospital. one of the hospitals in my town that shall remain nameless, and they misdiagnosed him. They said that he probably just had the flu, and it was a coincidence that she had dropped him, that vomiting was not a sign of a concussion in an infant, which is wrong. So they sent the baby home. He continued to throw up. Later that night, she took him back to the hospital because he had been vomiting all day continually. So the same hospital gave him anti-nausea medication and sent him home again. She stayed up with the baby all night long until he began vomiting blood. And then she took him to the hospital I work at, MCV, where they immediately said, give the child a CAT scan, and they found out that he was bleeding into his brain, and they admitted him to the PICU. Now, Grant is fine. He's fine. He's absolutely fine. But in that moment, they were terrified because they had been lied to twice. They'd been betrayed by a system that was supposed to protect them. They were afraid, and they're in here. And I happened to be in the hospital because that's where I work. And I said, I'm going to come see you. And he said, you can't get back here. That's only for families. I said, that's my problem. Because a lot of you know, you can go anywhere in the hospital if you just pretend you know what's going on. So it's like, I will be there. I will show up. So I just left my office, and I went and I sat with him for maybe a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and I translated doctor speak into, human, and sat with him for a while. That was it. It cost me 45 minutes of my life. His name is Matthew, is the father's name. It cost me 45 minutes. What do you suppose those 45 minutes meant to Matthew? It meant everything. It meant absolutely everything. He was afraid. He was sad. And I could do something. By doing what? By sitting with him. Paying attention to where I was proximally. Some moments matter more than others. Pay attention. Bring your focus into the moment. Be there when someone needs you to be there. Focus on them, not on yourself. I promised you 3 things. Here are 5. Don't be interesting, be interested. Be where you need to be. Make the moment matter. Ask before you tell. And show up when it matters most. I promise you, it costs you nothing. But you can be present, you can turn it on. Everyone in this room has the ability to turn this on just like that. All you have to do is know that you should and want to do it. Now, if you're interested, here's another thing. I have a podcast, because everyone has a podcast. But this is specifically for people who've taken little moments and changed their entire lives. It's called Reinvention Podcast. It's free. There's some free stuff on there about body language and things like that. Feel free to look it up. But in closing, as a way of closing, I promise you this will work. If you couldn't remember anything else from what I covered today, anything else from what we talked about, if you could only take one thing away from you, one thing, what would that one thing be? You can only remember one point. Be in the moment. Anybody else? It can be many things. Just one thing you'll remember. One thing that you can put into practice. Be there. Cost you nothing. Ask before you tell. I promise you, do any one of those things. Just do one thing to be in the moment, and you will be present, and you can make a difference in everyone's life. That's my time. Thank you very much. Always speaking after lunch is always hard. Yes, sir. Oh, get the mic. It's like the Phil Donahue show. Do you remember that? I'm old enough to remember Phil Donahue.
So I was thinking about how people are positioned, like sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at, like, for example, heads of state, they're sometimes almost like at 45 degree angles, and I was wondering if that has any special significance.
In politics, so the question was about where people sit in politics. In politics, it has to be choreographed because the stuff that I shared with you about proxemics isn't an opinion. There's a deep body of research around this. And where you stand matters, and where you sit at a table matters, especially for photo ops, because you're going to be remembered. I don't remember, do you remember there was a... So in politics, these are specifically choreographed in order to get the image that shows the relationship. Do you remember when President Obama bowed to somebody? and the world lost their mind? Do you remember this? It's because in the West, this is a status lowering thing. In the East, it's a status giving thing. But that image meant something. Or do you remember there was another time it was with the G7 and Trump like pushed forward between all those people and the world again lost their mind? It's because where you stand in relationship to other people does matter. If there's a group photo and you're a head of state, where you are in that photo matters. If you're standing or you're sitting. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. And as a result, every photo of him with other heads of state, they're all sitting because you don't want somebody standing. So those proximal things, and in terms of status and all that, there's a solid science behind it, and politicians know that. When I coach politicians, it's usually for debate, and you have to understand that if you're at a podium, and if I stand behind this podium, I can stand behind this podium like I'm trying to hide behind it. Or I can simply stand off to the side of the podium like this. Which one is more powerful? This one. Unless there's a big seal here that says President of the United States. In which case you stand behind that so that seal is also in the picture. So paying attention to body language and proximity is huge, especially in politics. And most of my highest consulting fees are for politicians. Yes, sir.
As you were talking about the cafe and the interested position, it struck me that we've seen more and more of Starbucks, brew pubs, add the long tables.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing they don't do anything that doesn't mean more money. So I'm guessing there's science to the long tables, getting people to sit together. Maybe they stay longer. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so Starbucks is an interesting thing. I actually did some consulting for Starbucks. And one of the interesting things is at Starbucks headquarters in Seattle, they have this giant building, you can get, on the floor, you can get free coffee. Free Starbucks coffee, they give it out. Turns out Starbucks gives away free coffee to their employees. There's also a paid Starbucks downstairs in the building. And the employees were going down to the one that they had to pay. And so they started doing some research around it because that didn't make any sense to them. Why pay for coffee when same coffee when it's not at your desk? Why do you reckon that is? Just to get the hell out of your office. Because, and it turned out that they found this, that what they wanted was Starbucks, this is when they began to develop this brand strategy. Starbucks would be an office away from the office. That's why there's free Wi-Fi, and that's why there's those big tables so that you can do group work. Because they want you to get out of your office, feel like you're still doing work, right? You can have a meeting at Starbucks. Have anybody had a meeting at Starbucks? I've had so many meetings at Starbucks. But it's because, that's why they have those long tables. And that's why they have comfy chairs. Because they want you to feel like it's a place, they call it a third space. So it's not work and it's not home. It's SPOM. I don't know what you'd call it. Yeah, but they do make it specifically so that you can have a lot of people working. So you can sit side by side. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good observation. I can hear you, it's okay.
Okay, so I have a question around round tables versus square tables.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that when you're working with, say, employees, or you're having a meeting that's maybe difficult conversations, or even just friendly conversations, do you think that round tables are more productive?
Well, yeah, because there's no corners, but you can still sit opposite at a round table. You can sit next to each other at a round table. The best advice that I and other consultants use, if you have the space and you have a desk and you also have to have some conversations, it's best to have another seating area where there's no tables, just chairs, so that you're not at a desk at all. You're just sitting, and you sit where you can look at each other and you can cross your legs and you can be a person in a non-formal environment. Difficult conversations, in the hospital, they have what they're called family rooms, and they're built exactly like that. They're built with couches and places where everyone can huddle in, and you can move the furniture and be closer or be farther away as you want to be. The problem is getting to the space. If you have to break the bad news, Somebody comes out and they say, how's my son? You go, come with me. Well, that's the news right there, right? You want to hear, he's fine, come with me, I'll tell you more. That's what you want to hear. But if you don't hear he's fine, so where you break the news matters. Hearing it in a hallway is different than hearing it in one of those rooms, is different than hearing it. So, and this is true in any relationship. It turns out, if I have a relationship talk with my wife and we have it in front of a roaring fire in Aspen, it goes better than if we have it in a car, right, behind Walmart when it's raining. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's atmospherics, but it's also where you are in relationship to each other. My best advice, my simplest advice, is to just pay attention to what the news is you need to deliver and what's the best environment to do it. Because a lot of times the office is not the right place. A lot of times it's like, let's go get coffee. I'll meet you for coffee. Let's talk outside of work. Or on the factory floor, managers who go, there's a management strategy called walking the halls, which is you don't do your work in your office, you do it away. You do it where people are working. You go to their office. You meet them on their ground. They're safe in their space. If you bring them into your space, they're automatically a little bit off. I don't know if I answered your question.
Quick question
Yes, ma'am.
about it being a whole nother presentation.
I'm happy to give a whole other presentation.
So let's say we're doing some of these 3 to 5 simple things and everything goes south, everything goes sideways. How do you reel it back in? Or do you save it for another day?
It's a great question. The easiest way for me to answer that is to recognize, and if we go back to these, this is the acronym we use, and I'll go ahead and tell you what it is. Pre is the moment before you have the conversation, which is if you're going to deliver what you know is bad news, you know that this is going to be unwelcome news or a difficult conversation, you don't go into that conversation with something else on your mind, right? You know, I'm going to take a breath, and you physically take a breath in, take a breath out, and bring yourself into the moment, because you have to be present. Setting is where it takes place. Where are you going to have this conversation? Where are you going to sit? Some of it has to do with proxemics, what we just did. Perception, ask before you tell. Immediate concerns are, so Dr. Lickham used to give water because they knew that she would do this. If somebody's in pain, you say, I know you're in pain, I'm going to give you medication as soon as we get to the room. Or if they're in severe pain, you go ahead and give them a shot right there before you go have some. Take care of something that's right pressing down. Knowledge is you deliver the news. Clear, concise, unambiguous. In the United States, you use the word dead, you use the word cancer. That is not true in Asia and is not true in Africa. There are cultural things around this where you don't say certain words. But in the United States, it's clear, concise, unambiguous. You don't sort of hem and haw. You don't say they've passed on, they're not here anymore. Here's a quick side story. There was I don't know if I want to end on this story. So there was a man his wife was a marathoner, and she had a heart attack and died during the marathon. And he got a call to come to the hospital. And he came to the hospital, and he said, I'd like to see my wife. Now, in his mind, all he got was a call, something's happened, be at the hospital. He thought she'd fallen down and hurt her knee. So when he got to the hospital, they didn't do any of this stuff. They didn't ask him. If they'd have said, what do you know? And he said, I just heard that she's here. They could have started over. But the guy said, well, she's not here anymore. She's gone on. Said all these things. He's like, what the hell do you mean she's gone on? Where's she? I got a call. And they're like, no, she's not here. She's like, and he's just started getting more and more mad because he could sense something. He's like, I want to see my wife. I want to see her now. And so, I mean, the doctor was trying to, and he just got furious, and he burst through the room, and he turned over a table, and they had to call security because they'd done everything wrong. Everything wrong. If they'd simply done a couple things, they wouldn't have had this terrible thing. Clear, concise, and unambiguous after you ask. Empathy in healthcare, we're horrible at measuring empathy. The standard is to wait 10 seconds after delivering the news. But it doesn't work. So would you do me a favor and tell me my cancer's returned and then wait 10 seconds before I ask you anything else? Just say if your cancer's come back. Oh my God, I was afraid of that. Is it large cell, small cell? Hello? Hello? Okay, so, and you're like, no, wait, hold on. Small cell. What that is to allow, what that suggestion is to allow space for an emotional response. People will feel something. Emotion is like a wave. I don't know if anyone's ever worked in like customer relations, and there's an angry customer, and you go, "Don't get mad." That does not go well. Because there's emotion is a wave, and if you get in front of it and try and stop it, it will have a thing to pound against. But if you simply let that wave break, if someone is going to cry, let them cry. If they're going to just hang in there. You don't have to talk and say it's going to be okay. You need to allow time. Just hang in there. Do what that woman did and just hold their hand. Just be there. So that's what empathy is, to recognize that humans are emotional creatures and to allow the emotion to take place. And then this second touch is the answer to your question. If you think that you can have a conversation about horrible news and one conversation is enough, you're absolutely wrong. As soon as someone hears the word cancer, they hear cancer, beep, and they don't hear anything else. Dead, beep, don't hear anything else. You have to think of them as multiple conversations strung out over time. It's the beginning of a conversation, and you have to make sure that you check on them. So there was a patient, she'd broken her hip. Her name was Mrs. Smith, and they gave her some medication, brought her to the room. But then, if they don't go back at all, Mrs. Smith feels alone and abandoned. But if the doctor just simply goes, "Mrs. Smith, I just wanted to say hi, that we've ordered the tests, and I'll check on you again tomorrow," and then walk away. That little touch, it's not a whole conversation, it's just a touch, is enough, because it takes time to process these things. So if the conversation goes wrong, then that conversation went wrong. You're going to re-engage because you haven't planned on doing it all at once. That's where the mistake is. It's my friend Dr. Alan Dow thinks of it as beads, like pearls on a necklace. It's a conversation that leads to another conversation, leads to another conversation, leads to another conversation. It's a relationship that you're trying to develop over time. Did that answer the question? So now I don't have to give you this workshop. You know it all.
Anybody else? Questions? No? Well, thank you again.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. I'll tell Frank that the fire idea went over okay.